So if I, my name is Stephano and I work for Intel. I work contributing full-time to the Yocto project. And my chief concern at my job is to enable customers, both internal and external, that are using Yocto to basically be more efficient at using it. So I'll go into their projects, find what about their project is they're struggling with, identify those pain points, and then either fix those for them by showing them better practices that they could be using, or by working with the team to upstream fixes so that their development happens quickly and efficiently. So that's a just quick overview of what I do. And the section that I'm talking about here is package feeds. And package feeds are very near and dear to me because in my job, I'll give you the basic example that I use package feeds for. It's important to remember that these are the same package feeds you use on your distro on your laptop, so don't take my example as the only use for this. Just take this example as the thing I do with it the most often, and then take that and run with it in whatever direction works for you, and when you have problems, you can contact me. So what I use package feeds for is this example. I use package feeds when I have a customer, and that customer needs an image from me, and they're new to Yocto. So I build them an image to get them started. I hand them off the image, and they're off and running, doing their thing, and I start training them on how to use Yocto. And in the meantime, they find that that image I gave them is not up to snuff. It's missing something. So it needs lib something, or it needs binary this. So there's a lot of ways to do that. You can, for example, I talked a little bit about Wick in my talk. You can use Wick to copy files onto that image you gave them and then hand them that image again. But that's a lot of overhead. And that means I'm once again sharing a large file over our network at work. Or if they're an external client, I have to figure out how to get them that file. So package feeds solve this problem, and they're surprisingly easy to set up, especially if your setup is something where you have direct access to networking. So if you can connect whatever device or whatever customer over the network to a machine that you have access to. If that networking exists, package feeds are easy to set up, they're quick for your customer to use, and they're extremely effective at quickly installing things and their dependencies. So quick overview. There's some important information that I think you should know that is documented but hard to find. One of these is that we currently test package feeds internally. However, we test RPMs and IPKs. So O-package and RPM are the two package managers we test. That does not mean that the depackaged stuff is not supported. It just means we're not currently testing it. So you may find a bug. Please submit that to the mailing list, and we will, or go into Bugzilla, bugzilla.yoctoproject.org, and submit the bug. And we will triage it on Tuesdays. If you'd like to watch it be triaged, please do join us. It's on Tuesdays, Thursday at 7:30 PST AM, because that's what I was doing this morning, and that's why I'm kind of tired. What else do we have? So for RPM packages, which is what I'm going to be doing my example on, we currently use DNF. We used to use something called the Smart Package Manager, but DNF is, just so you know, what Yum is moving to. So now that Yum is no longer being used, everyone's moving over to DNF, but I know that's relatively new, so I figured I'd call that out. I have already stated that setting up a package feed is easy. Those are two ways that you can contact me. So if you try this at home with these slides and you find it is not easy, that is how you contact me. And please do, because it's my job to be sure that these processes work flawlessly. So if you use them and you find any issue, please do contact me. I'm also going to talk about, I'm not going to give you an example, but I'm going to talk about assigning your package feeds. It's doable. I'm not going to say it's easy because assigning package feeds inherently is a little complicated, but it is completely doable. And then I wanted to talk about the two major cases that I see used in my day-to-day life. And I've already mentioned one of them, and that's on-target development. So when I work with customers, they have target environments that they're working on, and 9 times out of 10, they are doing development on that target environment. Cross-compilation is painful. Learning how to use Yocto takes time, but when your boss needs it next week, you're probably sitting on the board running GCC or whatever very long string GCC you're running. So that's the main use, and I think that's the faster, smarter way to do that is by using package feeds. The other one is updates in the field. So this is something that gets talked about a lot, and I wanted to address it. Is that possible to do? Yes. That is going to inherently come with lots and lots of complexities, and I'll talk about those. But the idea is that thinking of the initial reaction when you see this is you're going to say, oh my goodness, I can do over-the-air updates with this. Yes, that's a healthy reaction to have. No, that's not an easy solution. There are lots of reasons why that's complicated. I wanted to make sure I hit that. So I'm going to start by talking about setting up the package feed. We're going to go into a quick on-target example. So I brought my BeagleBone. I have hacked my BeagleBone onto my network of my laptop over Wi-Fi. And I actually have an AWS server running right now that has a very large package feed on it. So it's got lots of stuff that I can install in it. I'm not going to use this as an example to walk you through target development. I'm not going to be like doing development so you can sit there and be bored while I program in C. What I just want to show you is I want to show you the basic, simple setup that this took to accomplish. And I want you to see that it's running on an AWS server that's free. It's one of the free tiered servers because all you need is a web server. If you have a cheap web server and it has 8 gigabytes of space, that's a pretty big repo. And then we'll talk about signing package feeds briefly. The notes on here are a handy resource, but I'll talk about other resources that you should be using. And then finally, the future of package feeds, the idea of doing over-the-air updates, why that's really hard, and where I hope it can go in the future. So starting off by setting up package feeds. So this is ridiculously simple. There's a couple things that need to happen. First off, one of your image features has to be package management. The idea is that you need to tell Yocto from the top level, from the distro level, so either in your local.conf or in your distro.conf, you need to tell Yocto you're doing package management on this target. Because there's a lot of work that it's going to do for that to trickle all the way down to the actual image that gets built at the end. So that variable needs to be set. You can set it separately or anywhere where you put your extra image features, you can add package management in. And then the other one is you do need to pick a package class. By default, I believe it's RPM. Anyone want to raise their hand and argue with me, Tim? No? Okay. So by default, I believe it's package RPM. We're all going to guess that. Okay. So it could be package RPM, package deb, package IPK are your 3 options. So those are the 2 things that you need to check to be sure those exist. Once you've done that, package management is now available on the board. That being said, it's not going to work out of the box. It's going to work in that you can RPM install something, but it's not going to be easily connected to anything unless you fill out these optional parameters. So the package feeds URI, this just points to the repo, and we're going to get into, do I have a slide for it? I'll talk about it on the next slide. Setting up a repo is ridiculously simple. All you need is a web server, and I will show you how to publish the package index and publish the repo. But this is just pointing at the URL. This is going to set up the configuration on the target. So when you run RPM commands, it knows where to go. I'm actually going to show you on the BeagleBone where that is. It's not terribly difficult. This saves you a whole lot of time. And as you can imagine, this allows for a whole lot of automation. If you want to have several different URLs in there, or if you want to have different targets published to different URLs, you can do that. The base path, so both base path and package feed arches, these are set by default, so you don't need to set them. But think of this as when it's building that string of where is it going to go to pull RPMs off of. Well, I'm going to use RPM in this example, so I'll be saying RPM a lot. When it goes to the web to pull that, this is helping to build that string. So it's going to append to repo RPM, and then it's going to append to RPM one of these. So these aren't necessary at all. If you put your repository right there, it can figure that out. But these are options. And maybe now's a good time to mention, there are 2. If you look at this variable and you wonder, well, I wonder what that does. Stephano talked about it, but I don't really know all of its features. There are 2 documents that I always have open in my web browser. There's the Mega Manual and there's the BitBake Manual. So these are 2 separate manuals. You want to make sure in the URL, somewhere in there, it should say current or the version you're on. It's a very common mistake to end up looking at the manual and looking at some version that isn't your version. So double check that. But the Mega Manual encompasses a whole lot of information and a whole lot of information about these variables. If you search for it in the Yocto Mega Manual and you don't find that variable name, you will find these. But if you don't find the variable you're looking for, now go to the BitBake Manual. Because those are completely separate tools. The Yocto Manual is trying to help you use Yocto. The BitBake Manual is specific to that tool. So it's possible if you found a variable like overrides, it's living in that manual. If you can't find the variable in either of those, now git grep is your friend, but obviously you're going to be tossed into a file that you probably don't understand, but what you can do is then hit the IRC channel, hit the mailing list and say, here's the variable I found that's used in this class. What am I missing? It's not documented. If no one answers, I will answer. Hopefully someone with more experience than myself will answer, but if not, I will prod them into doing so. And then lastly, there's a couple of options that I'm going to talk about when I actually show you on the board, but these aren't necessary, but they are going to save you some time. So the GPG check, turning that off because we haven't signed packages yet is going to save you that first error that you're going to see when I try and run RPM install. And then metadata expire is a handy trick if you're going to be programming on the board and you don't want to have to worry about things expiring over time. And finally, enabled equals 1 just forces the enable for that repo. So these are 3 variables that I find really handy. And I have these up here because I've hit my head against some error, and putting one of those in has fixed it. And so rather than having you go Google the error, I figure I'll just give these to you, and I'll show you where to put them shortly. In fact, I might be showing you very shortly. Okay, last idea, really quickly going over RPMs. So RPMs, I could sit up here and talk for hours about RPM because it's such a complicated subject, but the idea is that an RPM is a binary file, and that binary file contains 2 things. It contains, well, there's a lot of things. It contains 2 main ideas in it. First, it has an archived CPIO of the stuff that it's going to install. So the, what am I trying to say? The artifacts. The artifacts that they expect you to install onto whatever target. And then it also contains a whole lot of metadata. There are commands that I show you shortly in a few slides to introspect these, but in general, a repo is just folders containing a whole bunch of RPMs, and then a folder that's indexed to those RPMs. And the index can be a lot of things, but what we spit out is SQL databases, SQLite. So when you first bitbake core image minimal, if you go into temp deploy, you're going to see an RPM directory. That RPM directory is going to have all those RPMs in it. What it's not going to have is it's not going to have a repo data folder. It's not going to have a folder with that index in it. And I'll show you the index after I create it. But you can create it any time with bitbake package index. So think about it this way. Let's say I bitbake Valgrind. So I bitbake Valgrind. Valgrind's RPM is now sitting in that folder. If I had already bitbaked a whole bunch of stuff and I ended with Valgrind, if I haven't run that package index since I bitbaked Valgrind, the Valgrind isn't in my index. So even if I point things at that repository, nobody's going to see it. So that command, bitbake package index, is extremely important. And like I said, I'll show you on the board what that actually creates. And then the last thing you see here, or the third command, so here I'm running Twisted. Twisted is a Python program that allows you to spin up a really quick and dirty web server. You can use Lighty, you can use Apache, use whatever is convenient for you. Something that I do regularly, I have a small Nook, a little desktop computer, and I have Apache running on it, and I rsync my, my repository over to it. That way I know I have a really sturdy web server up and running, but I've set that up exactly the way I want it. This command is going to start up a web server on port 5678 for me. It's going to do it really quickly. It's going to spit the output to standard out. So I'm going to open it in tmux and make my life easy. And I'll show you that shortly. In fact, I think the next slide, yes, I am going to show you that. But first, I have some caveats that I thought of recently. So first off, what are you going to put in this repo? Generally speaking, it's going to be more than the image you're giving someone or the image you're working on, because just putting the image up there doesn't do you any good. So there is a command, bitbake world. Bitbake world will bitbake everything in your layer. So if there's a recipe in your layer, bitbake world is going to bitbake it. So what I've done is I've taken OE core, I've taken Yocto, just vanilla Yocto, and I've bitbaked world, which has put every recipe from Yocto into my repository. Now what you can do is you can pick and choose what things you think you're going to need and bitbake those things and start filling up your repository with the stuff you think you're going to want. That's one of the reasons that I bitbake world is because I want to toss it off onto my repository, which in this case is running on Amazon Cloud, and I want it to live there permanently. But if you have a build server, and I think I see that next, I do. If you have a build server that you can host the repo off of, this is really handy. Because here's what you can do. You can say bitbake these images, because that's what I'm giving my customers. And then as your customers contact you, and by customer it can be a client, external or internal, it can be one of the developers sitting in the room with you, it can be anyone who's going to be running this image you created and then needing more software. As they come to you and they say, where's Valgrind? You say bitbake Valgrind, bitbake package index, and then you tell them to go pull it. Because you're pointing your web server directly at your build folder. Now, stop really quickly and say, don't do this in production, if that wasn't obvious. This is not a production solution. But it's a really fast solution for me in my day-to-day life when I have customers emailing me saying, hey, I can't seem to get this to build. I can't seem to get this to build. I tried to build this and I got this error. I can go back and look at that error they got. That will take some time, but I can also bitbake the thing they need and say, yep, go ahead and RPM install it. It makes my life so much easier. Don't forget to run bitbake package index. I hope I've already said that 100 times. Oh, good practice is to dog food your repo. I have 4 current repositories that people at my job are using, and I have a target connected to every single one of them. Because if you're not dog fooding your repository, it might be broken. So be sure when you tell the client, yep, or whomever, go install this from the repo. Before you send that email, install it yourself. Because nothing is foolproof. We all know there's little bugs hidden everywhere just waiting to be found. So do yourself a favor. This is a BeagleBone Black. It's hooked up over the UART. It's powered by USB. And I've connected, well, I've hacked the Ethernet into my Wi-Fi by sharing it. This setup is enough for me to dog food the repository I'm showing you today. So it doesn't need to be complicated. The machine just needs to be able to run RPM install. It doesn't need to be complicated. This could be a virtual machine, for example. Okay, next. Oh, right. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about Repo Md. So Repo Md Dot Xml. So when you index it, you're creating Repo Md Dot Xml, and all of this is, as I mentioned, is just an index of all the packages that you've created. So I'll show you on the board, but it's just going to contain some SQLite databases and some XML files. But all of that metadata is then going to be indexed in there so that when DNF or RPM goes to look to introspect what's available, it doesn't have to parse through the giant directory with all the binaries in it. It can just hit the index. There are some tools that are extremely handy. So some of the things that Yocto uses to do this is create repo is one tool. And this is installable from just apt-get install, create repo on most distros. You'll see it available. If you want to dig in deeper and figure out, okay, I want to create a very specialized repo, this is the tool you're going to need. RPM to CPIO. For those of you who don't know, CPIO is just like tar. It's just much older. it's what existed before tar was a thing. And it's still really handy because it does some things really, really well. It understands how to pipe data from one thing to another really well. And it's extremely simple. And to be fair, it has a lot of features that tar hasn't had until recently. So RPM to CPIO will pull that CPIO out of the RPM, out of the binary. So if you just want to unpack it and take a look at it, you can use RPM to CPIO and pipe that to CPIO, and then you'll see what's inside, what the artifacts that you're installing are. DNF I talked about briefly, that replaces yum, and I also mentioned yum utils. I mentioned that for historical purposes, because if you find yourself with free time and you'd like to learn why people are doing the things they're doing, yum utils has a lot of interesting hacks in it. I shouldn't say hacks. It has a lot of interesting utilities in it that can give you more insight into how the RPMs work. So there are 2 commands that I hope I'm going to be showing you shortly on the BeagleBone. One of them is RPM QIP. This is going to parse through that general info of RPM and give you the name of the package and some basic information about it. It's a really handy command, so I added it to here. And there's also RPM QPR, which will just show you the dependencies of that RPM. And you can point that, I'm using the P option in there, which points you at the package file, but you can also just point it at the actual thing you're trying to install. And with that, I think I'm going to attempt to show you a demo. So, as we always say, here goes the demo. Sorry if this doesn't work. Okay, so quick word about my setup. Let's see. Oh, good. That's readable. Okay, can everybody... Well, as it disappears, of course. Let's see. And that looks pretty small, so I'm going to make it bigger. I am typing IP for some reason. Okay, so assuming that you didn't need to copy down those numbers, is that mostly legible? Actually, Tim, I'll ask Tim. Tim, can you see that? Ish.
You could go one or two more bigger, but that's better.
Good to go?
Yeah, that's better.
Awesome. Okay. Wow, and I can't see it, so that'll be fun. Okay, so what I've done here is I've got a repository that I have published. I'm going to show you. So this is a free, the free tier Amazon web server instance of Ubuntu. And all I've done on this is shared one folder with Twisted, the RPM folder. So if we look at, let's look at, hold on, I'm sorry, let me just get my folder set up. So this is the server, very good. And I can connect, which is wonderful. And that's the place it came from. Okay. So if we look, this is my build folder. I'm going to go into Rocco, build. Okay, so this is my build folder that I actually did the build out of. And believe it or not, this is actually a dual core machine. And I did the build using SState. And if I had more time, I'd talk to you guys about how I did a build in 7 minutes with SState on a 2-core machine. And the reason is because SState just pulled everything in and it didn't actually have to build anything. But what it did do for me, which is awful handy, is inside the temp deploy directory, there's this RPM directory. And if I can remember my commands correctly. So as you can see, I've already bit-baked an image, and I've already created a repo data folder by running bitbake package index. So not only do we have all the RPMs that we care about, we also have the index that we care about. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and just rsynced that up to my server in the sky. So this is my Amazon web server, and on here I've got an RPM folder. So that RPM folder is just a direct copy from there. And if we look inside it, it contains the same things. And if we look at tmux, I've got a Twisted server running. So this mess that you're seeing now is just the result of me running that Twisted command. So Twisted has spun up a web server in this directory and posted it to the web. And that's why you can see, I hope if I can alt-tab to it, I can. So there you see the directory is being served up. Now, what I did after this wonderful SState example that unfortunately I don't have time to share with you, is I went to my build server at work and I did a bitbake world of Yocto. And then I rsynced that up. So anything that wasn't, I think the first one was core image minimal. So everything beside core image minimal got rsynced up to this directory. So this directory is now pretty beefy. And actually, I guess I could just show you. So how big is this directory? Let's say that. I can't read that. It is 3.6 gigabytes. So today, if you go to download a vanilla Yocto and you bitbake world, you're going to get about almost 4 gigabytes of RPMs. And over on my machine, I've gone ahead and installed the image where I set all those variables that I talked about first. So there were 4 variables that I set up, right? The 2 that just basically enabled package management, and then the ones that told it which URI to go to. So I can actually show you that. I think that's in my local conf. Because I want it to be nice and hacky, I put it in my local conf. So here you can see I'm setting extra image features. I've got package management, and then I've got in my package feed URIs, there's the URL to the Amazon Cloud account with the right port on it. So with any luck, going over to my BeagleBone, which I burnt the SD card before I came here, so I'm hoping this worked. We should be able to look in Ascii. Oops, if we know how to type, we can. And we got to remember that Vim isn't there. It's only VI. Ascii Yum. So here's the historical index I was talking about when I said DNF is sort of where we went after Yum. So Yum actually dates all the way back to Yellow Dog. It's actually what it stands for, is Yellow Dog Updater Modified. So I'm guessing there was one before modified. So yum, we're now using DNF instead of yum. So that's why you're going into yum to look for your config. But under yum repos.d, there's one config, the OE remote repo.repo, aptly named. So this is the only repository currently available. And if you look into it, there's the URL that's been populated. And those handy variables that I mentioned before are not there. So really quick, I'm just going to run DNF update and let you watch it fail. And the reason it's going to fail is because I haven't done signing yet, but I also haven't told RPM, I haven't told anywhere in the system that I'm not doing GPG signing. And being a good system, it's assuming you wanted things to be secure, so it's throwing a giant error. And that's why I thought it would be handy if I handed you those lines to put in there. So I will GPG check underscore, okay. Oh, wait, no underscore. Nope, just GPG check. So if I go ahead and change that file, I would copy and paste it if I thought I had that kind of talent on a separate screen. There we go. So I just want to add GPG check equals 0. And now with a little bit of luck, oops, that would be the wrong command. It's up here somewhere. There we go. Hopefully. If it has an internet connection. And DNF does take a little bit. It is parsing a giant package index. Okay. Nothing to do. That's very good. So what you missed is there should be, if there's any changes in the index on the machine, so on this target, if this index was any different than the index in the cloud, then it would show you down. It would show DNF downloading that index. But because I'm not that brave, I did try this once, so I know it does work. So the index already existed. But one of the things we can do now is simple stuff like DNF search, and let's see if Valgrind is there. I don't even remember if I added that. And I'm not spelling Valgrind right, am I? Yeah, looking out of the corner of your eye is a little tough. Valgrind. I think it's there. Oh, it is. How wonderful. Okay, so really handily, Valgrind is there. So if I am the client and I'm sitting there saying, "Ooh, I wish I had Valgrind," I can go ahead and DNF install it. And I'm sure you all believe me. If we go look at the depends for that, it's not just Valgrind that's missing on here. There's quite a few things missing. So let's go ahead and install it. Oh, actually, I'm wrong. There is only one other thing missing. Still, not bad that it found the libc6 debug for me. And so I can go ahead and install that. And aside from the fact that my Wi-Fi isn't terribly fast, that should install for me. So the idea here is that you're giving your clients an easy window into executables. And a lot of times you have people that are either developing on the board, or maybe they're just trying to work they're trying to create something with their build that's complicated, and they don't have time to wait for Yocto to do its thing. This is a much, much quicker way to do that. And I'm sure you believe me if I go through here and say, DNF install, let's pick something ridiculous. How about, I bet Ascii is on there. Oh my goodness, it is. All right. Really? Is that all it needs for Ascii? I would assume it would need a lot more than that. All right. Well, I was trying to pick something ridiculously large, but clearly I failed. But you get the idea. I'm very quickly installing things on this BeagleBone from a repository that I built from an x86 machine. I'm doing it on a free server. This is not complicated. This took me no time at all to set up. I didn't want to have you all walk through the setup with me because I think watching someone set variables is almost as fun as watching them DNF install packages. So that's the basic idea, and I was thinking about whether or not I'd go through and show you the details of the RPMs, but I'll let you guys do that on your own. I think I've put a lot of details on here so you can go dig into the commands. There is an interesting point that I learned recently. So there is a command with RPM to actually show you all the metadata and put it off to pipe it out into an XML format. So when I said there's metadata, there's a lot of metadata inside every RPM, but unless you're running RPM 5, there's not a good way to introspect that. Well, if you go to our tips and tricks page, which just got updated this morning, funnily enough, with the script you need. You can put in an RPM command, and it's a little complicated, so I'll let you go to the page and look at it. That will then spit out all that XML data into a file for you so that you can then put that into whatever system is easiest for you to look at. So that was the basic idea, and here is, let's see if this actually works. Okay. Okay, the next part, the part that I'm not going to demo because you all don't want to watch me set up signed packages. But I'm sure you're interested, so I'll go through the basics because while this isn't as simple as just setting up the repo, it really is only a few sets of steps. And if you've already done package signing before, this will seem very natural to you. But if you're like me and you're brand new to it, it actually isn't that difficult. There's just a couple places you can get tripped up, and so I'll go over it really quick. So first thing you have to do is inherit from sign RPM. This is the BB class that allows you to control different GPG variables from within Yocto. And then there's, this is for the packages themselves. So if there's a package that you want to be signed, you need to inherit in that recipe sign RPM. So there's two steps to this. You're going to have to sign your packages, and then you're also going to have to sign the repo. Do you have to do both? Can you just sign one and not the other? I guess. Anyway, I'm sure that's physically possible. It's a strange idea.
Is this required as a mandatory process? Or?
Nope, this isn't. So this isn't required at all. So what I'm showing you how to do here, just as a quick high-level overview, RPMs will basically do whatever they want. They can execute. There are ways to hack them so that they execute code. They're going to install files onto your file system, and they're going to change the RPM database. So they are inherently dangerous. So by signing these, you're setting up a really simple key pair, a public key and a private key that you can set up to guarantee that between the server, the RPM repo server, and the RPM program running on the target, those two things can sync up and say, okay, I know for sure this thing was signed with the key that I was told it was signed with. So I don't like to encourage people to go publish their stuff publicly, and I'm not trying to create an OTA solution here for you, but there's going to be an instance where you go to your boss and you say, hey, I'd like to do this, and they're going to say, no way, that needs to be secure. So this is the first step in securing that. I'm not a security expert, and I'm sure anyone would tell you that's the first step in securing this process. But it's a handy step. So this is signing the packages. You have to inherit from sign RPM. You have to define the name that you're going to be using for signing and the passphrase. And there's only a slight difference between this setup and the signing of the actual repo itself, the actual site that you're hitting. And that's just that the passphrase is in a file. So that's really the only difference. So when you have, now this is the package feed itself, so this is going to be at a higher level. So you're going to want this in your local.conf or your distro.conf. But here you're going to inherit from sign package feed, and then the package feed GPG name, and then finally the passphrase file. And I think I talk about later on about that. Oh, in the next slide, how handy. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of options that you can do when you're signing these things. There's a GPG bin that you can pass to. So obviously there's not just one GPG executable out there that you can use to sign, so you can pick whichever one you want to use, whether that be an open source one or a closed source one that you've purchased. You can point the GPG path to Yocto, so when you execute lots of these programs, they need to know what the path is so that they can pull all the environment variables that they require. So this is just a handy way to inject that. And GPG has a facility called Ascii Armor. I'm not, again, a security expert, nor am I a cryptography expert, neither of those things. But what I've been told is use Ascii Armor because it's important. And if you don't use it, it's slightly more efficient. That was the line I was given. So
it's basically a base 64 encoded file, mostly. So it's the binary file turned into something that you can cut and paste.
Ah, okay. So it's a convenience.
It's exactly the same content underneath in a slightly larger but more convenient format.
Okay. Oh, so the larger part is probably where they're talking about being more efficient if you don't use it. But that's a very slight efficiency gap.
Yeah.
So these are three other options, and all of these are optional. You don't have to set this. It will use the default GPG program that Yocto provides, and you don't need to set the path. By default, I believe the Ascii Armor is turned on. P-test. I'm talking about the P-test because Tim will throw things at me if I don't. So we're talking. So you're creating packages. You should really be testing those packages, but especially if you're distributing. If you're distributing these to anybody, unless it's a developer, they're not going to understand why it broke when it broke. So P-tests are pretty straightforward. Have we talked about P-tests yet today, Tim? Oh, look at that. I'm the first one. Are we going to talk about it later?
No, not really.
Okay, well, there are resources available on the web, and Tim and I will be giving talks about P-tests in the future. So you'll be able to learn more by watching videos eventually. So package tests are very straightforward. As the name is a little tricky because it probably should be package test, but P-test stands for package test. And the idea is that since we're generating all these packages with Yocto, we want an efficient way to automate the testing of each one. And we also want it to be really simple. So there's really only two parts to it. There's the actual test, which can be anything. Anything you want to do to test your package. You could roll your own from scratch. You could use some Python or Java or whatever test unit framework that you're using. The idea is that all it really needs is a shell script to fire it off. So there's two things you're going to need to do. You need to pick your test environment, how it's going to run on the target, all the stuff it's going to need, ball that all up and point at it, and then you're going to need the actual test. I know that this is very well documented, so I'm not going to go into the details of how to do this, but if you go into the documentation, there's a step-by-step walkthrough of how to build an actual P-test with a simple example. Getting it to actually run is extremely straightforward too. There's just a few variables. There's the distro feature, P-test, which I believe is enabled by default, and it's probably good to note. There are a lot of things that Yocto does by default. And P-test is one of them. I believe this is enabled, which means that for all of those packages that you're using for Yocto, you are generating P-tests for that. So you can run them by enabling them with extra image features, P-test packages. And you can also turn this off if this isn't something you want to be doing. There's a lot of stuff that takes a lot of time in Yocto, and this is one of them. And by turning these things off, you can speed up your builds. So I try to talk about things like debug flags that no one looks at. So if you go into the bitbase.conf file, you'll find that we've set up debug flags in a very specific way. And there's not a ton of documentation about this, but if you dig into the actual configuration file, you'll see that there's different levels of efficiency you can have in generating these this end of debugging. So by removing a lot of that stuff, you can speed up your builds. Just an odd side note. Keeping your code secure. So I mentioned I'm not a security expert, but I am talking about publishing things, and so there were a few caveats that I figured if I didn't mention, someone would yell at me. Let's see. Oh, the passphrase file. So we talked about the fact that there's a passphrase file. Please, 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 do not store this in your configuration in plain text. That's not a good idea. The whole idea behind key value pairs, or behind shared and private keys, is that you don't share this stuff in plain text. That's a terrible idea. I know that goes without saying, but if I don't mention it.
You can use OpenSSL to encrypt it.
Right.
In a way that'll work. So
yeah, OpenSSL, I mean, there are 100 ways you can encrypt this to make it simple to use and yet easily accessible. Plain text is not the correct way to do it. Let's see. Oh, proprietary code. So don't forget, your build system might contain proprietary code somewhere hidden in there. If it does, you should really be looking at the bin package.bb class. I'm not saying binary distribution is the way you should go. I'm just saying you should consider it. You should look at it. You should know it's available. But the idea here is if you do have proprietary code, if there's some chunk of IP in your layers, be aware of that. You're bit-baking an image or you're bit-baking a world. You're definitely bit-baking it. So you're generating these packages. They might have a whole bunch of debug flags turned on. They might be exposing a whole bunch of different stuff about your software. And I'm telling you to create a repository of it. So I figured it would be worth mentioning that if you do have proprietary code, you should keep an eye on it. I think that was it. I already talked about the debug flags, because I love harping on that. The future of package feeds. So this is where I just wanted to briefly mention some of the places I'd like to see this go, and I know others have mentioned this too, about updating in the field. So I mentioned that that's not something that we can do today. I do not recommend using this process to do OTA or any kind of in-field updates. However, that is a place we're looking to go. There's a couple of different problems with that, and some of them are pretty difficult, so some of them are easy, but the idea is that today we don't have a solution for a lot of things like switching the sources. So if you want to upgrade in the field and you want to tell the target, okay, those aren't your sources anymore, these are, you're just going to have to roll that on your own. We don't have that today. But it is something that we're interested in. There's also not a way for us to go in and remove sources. So if we know for sure that we deployed this with these sources and those can't even be on the board anymore, we don't have a way to go in and do that. That's just from the repository level. On the package level, there are a couple of different parts, difficult parts. Checking to be sure that none of the packages are broken, or even simpler, checking to see whether or not they've been renamed. So these are I guess the reason I'm bringing these up is because these are the kind of problems that we're facing, that we're trying to think about good ways to solve. So as you're using this, as you have ideas and you think, oh, okay, I see how you've deployed this. If the name were to change, this would really break the system, and you have ideas, please do share them. Talk about removing specific packages, so if something that's release dependent. Blacklisted and whitelisted items change all the time. We're currently there's nothing on the target default tracking that. And then just thinking about things, I actually had a customer once say to me when I set this up for them, they said, oh, this is perfect. We'll be able to update our kernel with this. And I thought, yeah, you could try that. So don't be surprised. Don't think that everyone understands the level of depth that you understand your system. So when you hand this to someone, please, please, please be a good steward of this and know that they may receive it and run DNF update on their kernel. So please be aware of that. And please know that we're also looking into this. I work every day with customers that are trying to do in the field updates. And I work for a large company. Wheels move slowly. Gears turn very slowly. So it's hard to get new features enabled that make everyone happy. But we're always happy to take your input, and we're always happy to take any batches, as always. You know what? Hold on, wait. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, you wanted the last one, didn't you? Okay.
So another, I guess, feature is atomic upgrades. So basically, what happens is you start the upgrade for other packages and something breaks, then you actually go back to the previous root state.
Right. Yeah.
SUSE are doing something on the desktop with a PhotoRefs snapshot and stuff like that, but
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have several clients that are looking at things like Butterfest. They're looking at read-only base layers, levels of their file system, and then layering on top of that file system that they can read and write to that gets blown away every time they reboot. These sort of problems, so I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Mender and looked at Mender solutions. These are problems that we're all trying to solve right now. And I think the Yocto community, the open embedded community, the Yocto community, there are great communities to come together and think about these things because all of our companies are going to try and solve these problems. And it's all the same basic problem. So the ESDK. So, oh, sure. Yes. So the question was, with these kind of feeds, I think what you're saying is if you also have an SDK, how do the two play together, or do they play together at all? It's an interesting question. So the idea of an SDK doesn't really take into account packages, but the ESDK is up. Sorry, go ahead. Okay. The part I was just going to say was just that. So the problem that I think you're trying to solve is I've shipped this SDK and now I want to update it. Is that the basic idea?
So in our case, we ship stuff to customers that are not necessarily end users, so they end up doing a lot of the device, but then eventually they'll install stuff. If I want to then update something, their SDK is no longer access on the device, and that usually goes wrong.
Right. So there are lots of tools that RPM has to introspect what's changed, what things have been installed, and you could have the answer is there's nothing currently baked in that solves the problem you're seeing. But one of the solutions I would think of was RPM has ways of saying here are the things that have been installed, and you can then on your end utilize the ESDK to update that. So are you currently shipping an SDK or an ESDK? Both, okay. Right, yeah, so it's, yeah, the ESDK isn't the link that you need. There is a link that's missing there between, and I feel this pain all the time where the customers run off and they do something really interesting and then they come back and say, hey, we need stuff in our SDK. I'm like, oh, what kind of stuff? Like, how do we connect that? But yeah, that's a good topic.
stage correctly, it's hard to do those long installs there with as far as that.
Oh, okay.
There's no errors for packet installs.
Right. Yeah. No, using rsync as an atomic upgrade idea is definitely, that's something I've seen before, something I've done personally, but yeah, that's very helpful.
I think we had discussed this before. So, there's no way to do the continuous package management throughout the cycle, right? It's Thursday.
Yeah, so one of the things that I didn't mention here was the fact that there is a revision server that you run, and the revision server is going to increment every time you change your build. So I didn't want to get into the guts of how you use this in the field to do development in an iterative way. But one of the things you can do is turn on, it's the PV server. And what it's doing is it's versioning every time you change a recipe, it increments the version. And that way, this RPM setup will work across many changes on your end. So as you're changing recipes, it's incrementing versions. DNF on the other end is looking up and saying, oh, hey, there's a new version. I guess I'll pull it down. And yeah, to your point, when you're working across different versions, so once you cross that barrier, not just changing the recipes, but changing branches, moving from Pyro to Rocco, or if you're moving from Rocco and then, or you have a person who's wants to upgrade from Rocco, and so they're working off the master branch now, and you want to send them updates. There is no compatibility right now between those two things because so much changes. And that slide that I had that basically said this is not the way to do huge upgrades. Those are the kind of problems we're facing. And that is something that we're interested in solving. This is something that we definitely would like to be able to do. So to be able to go from Pyro to Rocco and just run a DNF upgrade and have it make all these changes. But because the changes are so substantial between the branches, it is a really tough problem to solve. Henry, of course.
Roll back to the start. You had the 3 environment variables. Set the URL for the package feed. Stuff from there. You said you had to make some changes.
Oh, I sure did. Yeah, I know the slide you're talking about. This one.
Yes, the final section.
Yes.
So is that saying that when you set those variables that your feed won't work? You actually have to go and amend the young repo.d file.
Yeah, so the error that I showed you is because there was no GPG check in there. So the feed will work. Everything is set up to work, but the target is looking for something that's signed by default.
So by default, it's looking for something that's signed.
So just by deploying, with a vanilla setup, just those variables I show you, it's really quick to deploy and get it up and running, but that variable right there, GPG check, will be necessary. And if
really cool to have a variable that says I don't want to give it signed.
Absolutely would. Yep.
You have to tinker with that.
Yep. So it would add one more line in it. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yep. No, if I took the time and scrolled through that error, you'd see it was obviously trying to GPG communicate and failed. So thank you all.